1, 2, Satan's coming for you.
Whew, that was crazy.
I don't know how to start a story about fucking a woman dying of the devil. And Hitler and Nero and...
Well, not like that. You're giving away all the good parts. Exorcisms. You can't live with them. You can't live without them. Actually, you probably.
You'd live much better without them.
Warning. The topics discussed on this podcast are subject to adult themes and languages. We seek to unravel the unexplained and unknown. This is Encounters.
Your mother sucks cocks in hell.
Oh. No.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Encounters. My name's Dakota.
My name's Amanda. No, you don't want to.
Today...
You don't like it?
That's fine. Today, we are talking about the case of Anneliese Michel, which is an exorcism case from the 1970s, and is the inspiration for the story and film The Exorcism of Emily Rose. It's an intense story, so we just want to put out viewer discretion is advised. We're about to give you a very dark and twisted possession story that ends in death.
Well, you gave away the twist ending.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, there's plenty of twists and turns left in this fucking story, I promise you that. This woman is forgotten by half the people that know of this case and revered by many others that know of this case. And it all starts in 1952 with the birth of Anneliese Michel in Bavaria, specifically Klingenberg, Germany. Her family, the Michels, were very devout Catholics.
3 of her aunts were nuns.
It was also apparently a family tradition. At least one of the children in every family of the Michels was expected to serve in some kind of liturgical service or religious duty.
Before her parents got married, her father was actually studying to be a priest.
And Anneliese showed at a very early age an interest in wanting to be a school teacher, specifically to teach religious studies to children.
Like Dakota said, the family was very, very Catholic. So when their mother actually had an illegitimate child before Anneliese, she was shamed by the church and actually had to wear a black veil on her wedding day.
Shady.
Sucks, man. But Anneliese always was a kind of person, even very young, who wanted to atone for people's sins. So she often prayed for her mother, for the shame that her mother caused to the family, stuff like that.
Ultimately, as a child, people would say that she was a very happy child. They would report that she had a very normal childhood, except very specifically religious. But everything would culminate into this, geyser that would burst forth at her 16th birthday, or in and around her 16 years of age.
Yes.
In September of 1968, Anneliese would suffer her first psychotic episode. She was at school where she lost consciousness. She later woke up at midnight where she was suffering a bout of sleep paralysis and lost control of her bladder and suffered a seizure.
And that happened one time, right?
That was the very first time it happened.
And then, if I remember correctly, it didn't happen for a whole nother almost year.
Almost. August 24th, 1969, she has her second episode where she again suffers from a bout of sleep paralysis and a blackout. She starts to talk about seeing figures in a room. What we start to see happening now are the early signs of epilepsy. In fact, she suffered epileptic-like seizures for the next 3 days. in August 27th of 1969, she actually has a full-on epileptic attack and is taken to a doctor. The doctor looks her over and says, yes, I think she may suffer from seizures, but doesn't prescribe her any kind of medication at the time. But what we need to know now, before we go into this next year, because this next year is when some things start to really hit her medically. As a child, Anneliese was very sickly. She was always having some kind of illness. In fact, at 5, she went through a bout of having measles, and then mumps, and then rolled into a whooping cough. In 1970, we see an emergence where she's rushed to the hospital because she's believed to have tonsillitis. Then, in an extended stay in the hospital, she gains pneumonia and is fighting that for a bout until it develops into tuberculosis. In June of 1970, we have our 3rd episode of psychosis. Anneliese has violent, psychotic attacks and seizures, and she's taken to the hospital again, and they don't notice any irregularities in her brain at this time. But they do believe that she is suffering from epilepsy and seizures and prescribe her an anti-convulsive treatment specifically for epilepsy. She doesn't leave the hospital for 2 more months and finally returns home in August of 1970 and recalls having grievances cast against her, specifically referring to them as frogetten. Everything kind of calms down. She continues with her school. She returns to normal life. And it's at this time in school where she meets her boyfriend, Peter, continues to up that social life, but her fellow students start to notice this withdrawal from people. In 1973, Anneliese seeks out a doctor, informing him that she starts to see demonic faces in the walls around her. She has a feeling that the devil is residing inside of her.
The devil is inside of me.
And she reports to him that she can smell a foul odor, like burning shit, really. That's basically what it smells like. Anneliese, in fact, goes on to say, quote, "I am damned to hell." This goes on for 2 years. She starts getting treatment, and they keep upping her meds and trying different things to control her epilepsy, up until a point where apparently a doctor tells her and her family, you know what, you just need to seek a priest. And in March of 1973, there's an incident that Anneliese has where she's sleeping in bed and she claims that she can hear knocking on the walls. And it drives her to a point where she starts to scream in terror. And her family wakes up. But they don't hear knocking at all. This is when they finally seek a priest.
Well, at first they couldn't find anyone to help her, because no one thought she was possessed. It wasn't until things started really going south that they met the priest. I think his name was Olt.
Yeah. Because she has exams with her doctor, and when these exams are going on, the demonic forces start to increase. In fact, during dinner one night, she says demonic faces start to swirl on the wall, and her hands swell to quadruple the size. She cries out, "I have black hands. My savior, forgive me."
There was also an incident where she was crawled underneath the table and started barking. And she stayed like that for 2 days. Just barking at her family.
The demons that she was reportedly seeing, she goes on record to say, quote, "have 7 crowns and 7 horns," end quote. And it's at the, after these kind of events start to happen that people are, starting to believe more of the idea that it could be a possession case.
Yeah. The first person who actually said to her that she was possessed, I think her name was Theo Hines. And she was an older woman at her church, and she was accompanying Anneliese on a pilgrimage when she noticed that she would avoid walking to in front of this certain statue of Jesus, and she would not drink any of the water from the holy spring, and the woman said she also smelled hellish.
Like Amanda said, these priests initially refused to see this as a possession case for the simple fact that at the time the idea was that the baptized couldn't be possessed by demons. Thus she couldn't be possessed because she's a baptized Christian or Catholic.
Also, yeah, and at that time in Germany, a lot of people didn't believe in the devil. I think I saw a number like 68% of people didn't believe in the devil.
Yeah, there was a shift away because the state was moving towards a more atheist-driven governance. In 1974, Anneliese starts to finally break down. She says, quote, "I cannot cope with my realities." There's an instance where her mother sees her in front of the portrait of the Mother Mary standing with entirely black eyes, just gazing off as if she was in a trance. But hell really breaks loose in May of 1975 when Anneliese suffers the trauma of losing her grandmother.
And I think her older sister moved out too.
Like, how old is she at this state? 1975.
I think she was 20, I think.
She was 22 at the time when her grandmother died and her sister moved out. But because she was having these issues, she was living at home.
Yes.
In 1975, Ernest Alt seeks out another priest, Arnold Renz. Alt has been with this family because they're at this point seeking help. They've been taking her to medical facilities to treat her for her epilepsy, and it's not doing any good for her. There's a time when the seizures are repressed and she's able to live a good life for like those 2 years, but after these traumas start to come up, she starts to have more and more problems with her mental health. And so they seek out Ernest Alt for help, and Alt seeks out Arnold Renz to join the case. And in their very first meeting with Anneliese, or with Renz's very first meeting with Anneliese, Anneliese is viciously thrown across the room and down to the floor. She would continually get up and do the Hail Mary prayer. And then she would be thrown again across the room, and she would come back across and just continue trying to do the prayer. She, in fact, was so violently thrown throughout this time that she took to sleeping on the floor for the next 3 years.
Yeah. The amount of things she started doing when I think The Exorcist started is kind of crazy. She would often, like, rip off her clothes.
Yeah. During this trial exorcism, Father Renz is noted as trying to get these demons, or whatever, they don't know what it is at the time. They're trying to get whatever it is to leave. He says, "Depart, say who you are." And Anneliese apparently sits up and grabs her own throat and tears off the rosary beads. And this destruction of a sacred item is what led the priest to get the final, that's what the Vatican finally took as the final straw to approve the exorcisms. And the date was scheduled. The very first Sunday of September 1975, the very first exorcism would take place, with Arnold Renz in the spiritual lead, with Alt providing backup and spiritual help. Apparently what's really crazy about this very first exorcism is the demons immediately made themselves aware. The demons were so immediately available, the priests didn't know what to do. They were underprepared. But they did record everything, apparently at the request of Anneliese, and the demons requested that it be made public, so that proof of the devil could be made available to everyone. Through the course of these exorcisms, 6 demons made themselves known. And they have actual recordings of these demons. And the 6 demons that resided within Anneliese were Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, Hitler, and a priest named Fleischmann, who was a disgraced 15th century priest who apparently was a really bad guy, but is kind of like an obscure figure in theological, liturgical studies. There's actual audio recording of these things, as we said, announcing themselves, and we're going to play them for you right now. Be warned, they are terrifying.
Ich bin Nero! Ich bin der Dritte im Bunde!
Noch mehr.
Halt ihr Maul! Ich bin kein.
Seid ihr also 4? Hitler? Hitler ist gelogen. Sage es deutlich. Im Namen Jesu und im Namen Mariens. Im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes.
Ja, ich bin auch hier. Wer denn? Hitler!
There's a really interesting conspiracy. People say that these demons may have picked these names because they knew that these were things that people would be scared of, so they thought that they could trick the priests or trick whoever was listening that they were greater powered demons, because a lot of people are like, why would Lucifer just pick this random 23-year-old girl to run around in? But this is when Anneliese would start ridiculing the sacred Holy Trinity. The demons would exalt themselves.
Sag mir den Namen. Ich, der Judas, der Nero, der Kain und der Hitler. Feststimme.
Das ist der 6.
Und haben wir gelogen.
Lucifer is quoted as saying he wanted to conquer the earth. Hitler would announce himself with a Sieg Heil, and apparently spoke with the correct inflections with the Austrian accent. Anneliese would become violent and attack her family members and siblings and the priests.
bist du da zu?
Ich verbrech das so, dass ich in dem Wald drin bin. Ich trag Idiotennasen noch so lang, bis es recht wird. Saufen die Wein. Für uns geht's kein zurück. Nee! In alle Ewigkeit!
There's a moment where she bites the head off of a bird. She goes on to eat spiders and drink her own urine off the floor. There's even a recorded incident where Anneliese is so empowered by the strength of these demons that she crushes an apple with one hand and sends like bits and pieces of apple flying throughout the room. It's noted at this time that the spirits would be very violent and throw her even more at this point, so much so that she was covered in bruises. The priest also noted that she would eat enormous amounts of food, yet she always looked like she was starving and would become emaciated. Furniture flew, and eventually, during these exorcisms, they would have to restrain Anneliese in a chair, either by tying her down or chaining her down. And it continued for months. And all while these exorcisms are going on, she's still carrying on a full-on relationship with her boyfriend Peter. In fact, during these exorcisms, she gets engaged, and there's a moment that they go on a walk in the forest. And Anneliese apparently wanders away from Peter. He says she stumbles away in some kind of trance, and she sees the Virgin Mary, and goes on a walk with her. And the Virgin Mary says,
It pains my heart So many souls will go to hell.
And basically asks Anneliese if she would do penance for all of the souls that could go to hell. And Anneliese is like, I don't know. And Virgin Mary says,
You got 3 days to accept or reject my offer.
ultimately, she accepts, and she informs the priests in the Vatican and everything of what's going on, and accepts that she is going to do this, and says the Virgin Mary will return on the 31st of October this year. And so they set that day as the expulsion day, the final exorcism to end all things. The priest sat down with Anneliese and worked one by one through all of these demons. The demons all scream, she's coming, she's coming. And then it stops. And Anneliese apparently comes out of this trance and says, I'm free, completely free. Now it's so wonderful. I'm completely free. But 15 minutes later, all of the demons came back. The priests were doing a closing cleansing prayer, and the demons came back full force, screaming that they couldn't leave. They wanted to leave, but they couldn't leave. And then Anneliese starts to scream and shriek as if she's in great pain. Her pain intensified so much so, in May of 76, Alt seeks out a doctor, see if he can help prescribe pain medication for her. And apparently the doctor goes on record as saying, I can't give medicine to a possessed person because I don't know how it would affect them. There is no injection against the devil. These possessions continue. The demons continue to say they can't leave, they want to leave, and now they start to bitch about having to stay inside Anneliese. And Anneliese is admitted into the hospital to be looked over because she's not eating anymore. She states that she's not allowed to eat and starts to become emaciated. There's a slow decay that starts to happen. Apparently, they also found stigmata marks on her feet, and then it slowly transitioned to her hands. The final exorcism was performed June 30th of 1976, and the only thing that Anneliese said the entire time was, please, absolution. Anneliese Michel died July 1st, 1976, at age 23. She'd suffered 67 exorcisms that would range from an hour to anywhere over 4 hours.
Her knees were broken because she would fall down to pray. She would fall to her knees and pray. So her knees were destroyed because these exorcisms would last so long.
Her official weight, recorded by the autopsy report, was 68 pounds. The official cause of death was ruled as starvation. And almost immediately, the government charges the priests and parents with negligent homicide. Now, when this case went to trial, It was intense. Basically, you had the defense arguing religious freedom and saying that they were doing everything they could for her, while the prosecution was saying you didn't do enough. The autopsy report showed that Annelise's brain was looked at. It was proven to be healthy and that there was no sign of any epileptic harm. Both sides of the court took the evidence in very different ways. So let's examine it first from what the defense attorneys were saying. So the defense attorney's plan was basically to submit the eyewitness testimony from the priest, the parents, and the doctors and everyone, and the audio tapes from the 42 recorded exorcisms. Their main platform was that Anneliese had the right to seek whatever kind of medical attention she wanted. She waived the right to seek medical attention and instead focused on religious attention. And they also said they did try and seek... Anneliese was trying to seek medical attention because she was being medicated for epilepsy, and one of the priests had actually sought out Dr. Roth for help with pain and to examine her.
Yeah, there was medical intervention pretty much the entire time the exorcism was going on.
Yeah. The real problem with their case was the eyewitness testimonies gave mixed testimonies. The doctor said when he looked at her there was stigmata, but there was no bruising or anything. But the priests were adamant about the fact that she was covered in bruises because she was flying all over the room. The defense also used the autopsy to a major point, saying that the brain was healthy and that there was no epilepsy damage, even to a microscopic level.
Yeah, but the court wasn't here.
Yeah, the court didn't want to hear that at all.
I don't even know if they even mentioned it much, other than the defense.
No, in their ruling at the end of the thing, they didn't talk about it at all. Possession wasn't even considered to be a legitimate argument in the court because atheism was being pushed as the state religion at that time. The prosecution, however, went on the medical attack. They said Anneliese had epilepsy and psychosis, and that the parents and the priests were responsible, and they even went so far as to claim that Father Alt was schizophrenic, or showed tendencies of schizophrenic behavior. They stated that the medications were successful in suppressing the epileptic seizures, and that this suppression from her medication is what led to a delusional psychosis, which is associated with epilepsy, and that this psychosis created the exorcism fantasy that the priests, her parents, and Anneliese fed into. They said that this is how it was because she had normal phases. Because she was able to be a normal person and be engaged with Peter, she must be suffering psychosis because she's also able to carry on a second life where she's got 6 or 7 demons living inside of her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people thought she was schizophrenic.
But a major thing that the defense brought up in retaliation against that aspect was that Anneliese's psychosis far predated the medical suppression. So they were saying that she suffered from these demons way, way long ago when she was 16 and seeing demonic faces in the walls long before she was prescribed the specific medication that suppressed her problem. Officially, the court ruling was, since Anneliese was unable to make decisions for herself, she should have been forced to receive medical care. And thus, the family was found guilty, and the priests were found guilty. They were sentenced to 6 months in prison, but that was a suspended sentence, so they didn't have to serve any time. And 3 years probation. And they had to cover the entire cost of the court fees. Apparently, this lenient sentencing came because the prosecution just wanted the priest to be fined and the parents to be found guilty but not punished.
Yeah. Pretty much this whole trial was to discredit the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
That was the main focus for everyone. But Anneliese refused to go to the hospital. That was one big thing. She really refused to go seek any other she didn't want to be in the hospital. She didn't want to be forced to do anything.
Well, because she'd spent so much of her time, like, going to doctors and trying different medications and trying different therapies, and she felt like she was getting nowhere.
Yeah. She really believed that she was possessed. And anyone who knew her believed that she was possessed. But a lot of skeptics will really lean on the mental health issues. People think she was sick, and her family, being so radically religious, kept her away from the help she needed. And there are forms of epilepsy that cannot be treated with medicine. But at the time, a lot of people didn't know about it, because I don't think the MRI machine was invented until 2 or 3 years after she passed away.
Yeah, no one even saw the full brain scanned image of Anneliese. And as Amanda said, 20% of epilepsy cases are actually untreatable and non-responsive to medicine. So that's the big skeptical aspect. The other aspect is these recordings and the suffering that she went to. They supposedly said that she died as a martyr, suffering for the sins of mankind, taking these demons to their grave with her rather than releasing them back into the world. Apparently 3 years later, the parents had her body exhumed because they wanted to give her a better coffin because she was buried in a cheaper one. And in the picture, supposedly you can see Satan's hand crawling out of the casket, and it was said that there's a halo above her, though the two men, there's a interview with the two men that exhumed the body, and they were like, we didn't see anything.
Yeah.
But they were also atheists. They were like, we don't believe in that.
Right. But like Dakota said at the beginning, other people, she is a straight up religious idol. Like, people believe she was possessed and she died taking those demons down.
And after that, the Catholic Church finally recognizes that exorcism should be a last resort. It actually changes its policy to focus on mental health. I believe it was John Paul II that changed that policy and instituted a new era of what mental health is, what it should be looked at, and the old ways, the medieval ways of exorcism were kind of cast further into this dark portal where it's forbidden knowledge and it's only used as a last resort.
Yeah, so it changed up the church. Not that they were doing a lot of exorcisms before.
Right, I mean, they were already skeptical. They didn't want to do them because they bring such attention as this and end usually in death.
If I remember correctly, only 3 priests performed exorcisms. Or maybe that was after, but like it was always kind of on the DL. And they were always done secretly. Even Anneliese's case was told to be secret, but after she passed away and with the court case, it became known it was a huge case.
So much so that it inspired a movie named Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Did you know the girl who plays Emily Rose, she was able to actually contort her body like that, so they saved a shit ton of money because they didn't have to hire a stunt double.
That's crazy.
Yeah, all of those crazy positions she was in, she did it herself.
It's a great possession movie, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't much like possession movies. They really freak me out, but I thought it was...
And they did add the part where she sold Mary, and they did a really good job, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of follows the story pretty well.
It does, but it's important to note that the family didn't receive any kind of compensation for the film, which is really, different in our world of horror here, unlike the Lutzes, or the Warrens. There was an interview done with her mother, and she was like, no, I haven't seen the movie. I don't want to see the movie.
She didn't want to.
This is a horrible time in my life. I do not want to see that.
Right. I actually have a quote from her mother. She says, I know that we did the right thing because I saw the signs of Christ on her hand. She was bearing the stigmata. That's a sign from God that we should exorcise the demons. She died to save our lost souls and atone for their sins. And her mom said that in 2005. It was very hard for her mother. They were very close.
I mean, it's got to be hard for anyone.
Yeah.
Mother, father, even the priest.
But especially, I mean, not to be one of those people, but I think her mother, it really affected her.
I can see that. But that is the story of Anneliese Michel.
Poor thing.
Poor thing. Join us next week when we talk about the fairies. We're going to be talking about fairy mounds, the fairies of Ireland, and changelings. If you like what you hear, please find us on Facebook at Encounters, a Paranormal Experience. You can also find us on Instagram at Encounters of Paranormal and Tumblr at Encounters of Paranormal EXP. Encounters is also on YouTube, Libsyn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and a plethora of other podcast distribution websites. And until next week, I'm Dakota.
I'm Amanda.
Stay spooky.
It's not stopping. Damn it. What's up?